I wanted to thank Rose Tursi for being here tonight. She presented this topic 1 year ago to NAMA, and I thought it was such a fun, lively presentation. I asked if she would represent it for us. In the meantime, stuff has happened, and she updated the presentation to be more relevant and up to date, and kind of specifically speak to the Minnesota Club, as we were the first one to have a state mushroom. I also have special guest Alan DeSouza here from the San Francisco Club, who can, at the end of the presentation, answer some questions from Rose about the current state of the California state mushroom. But welcome Rose Tursi, who is a member of, I think you used to be a member of the Wisconsin Club, but also the South Sound Mushroom Club. She's very active in NAMA and is the arts chair there. So she's responsible for the what used to be the photo contest and now is an art contest, including photos. So some of us fiber artists and sculptors and other artists in other mediums can also participate. So welcome, Rose.
Thank you. Thank you. It's great to be here. And thank you for inviting me. Yeah, that's everything you said is basically accurate. I'm just finishing up a term as vice president of the South Sound Mushroom Club in Olympia, Washington. But I did at one point live in Wisconsin. I was involved in that club. I don't live there anymore. And at one point I lived in California, and I was involved in clubs in California, but in Southern California. So I've been very paying close attention to the efforts in California, even though it's not really technically relevant to me anymore. And I also have updates on what's going on in Washington and elsewhere in the country.
So I've always had an affinity for official state things. Many of you might have me as a friend on Facebook. This has been my profile picture for the last several years. It's me standing in the mouth of the giant muskie in Hayward, Wisconsin. Everyone who sees this picture thinks it's a dinosaur, but it's not. It's a fish. It's the official Wisconsin state fish. And tangent, since I've mentioned dinos, did you know there are 17 official and candidate state dinosaurs? And that list is completely separate from the 45 official state fossils, 14 of which also happen to be dinosaurs. But I digress. Here's me dressed as a pirate at the Tall Ship Festival in Dana Point. That's the Californian, which is the official tall ship of California. There are 19 official state ships. Most of them are tall ships, not all of them though. For example, this nuclear submarine is somehow the official ship of Colorado, a landlocked state. Don't worry though, the crew visited once. Heck, I even wrote and illustrated an entire book about a Garibaldi, which is the official California state marine fish. Not to be confused with the official California state freshwater fish. There are 63 official state fish, by the way, because, like California, many states have too. But let's talk about the origin of state symbols. Where did this trend of naming state symbols begin? The answer is the 1893 Chicago World's Fair. This was the origin of the concept of the state flower. A Congress of women from each U.S. state and territory was asked to choose a flower to represent their state's history, culture, and environment as part of the National Garland of Flowers. Here, I am very happy to report that my current state of residence, Washington, was the very first state to select a flower, the rhododendron. Women's clubs from around the country introduce bills at the state level to declare an official flower for their state, often involving school children in the selection process. Today, all states have an official flower. Canada decided to play this game too, and here are the provincial flower emblems of Canada. This began a trend that led to the adoption of official birds, then official trees, and eventually all the other official symbols recognized today. But how exactly is a symbol made official? Well, the details are a little different in each state, but generally, if you want an official state symbol, you first find legislators willing to sponsor a bill, so a senator or a House rep. You get one or more of them on board to write and file a bill. They are then debated and voted on in a committee hearing. Then they move to the chamber floor where there is more debate. To continue, the bill is passed by that chamber. Then the bill crosses over to the opposing chamber. So if it originated in the House, it crosses over to the Senate or vice versa. The bill is heard in a committee in the new chamber. And then if that committee passes the bill, it moves to the chamber floor. And if the second chamber passes the bill, then it goes to the governor, who either signs it into law, vetoes it, or does nothing. Fun times. So, in addition to what I said earlier about flowers, birds, and trees, almost all states have official insects and animals. In addition, many specific types of animals are their own symbol. For example, 33 have official reptiles, 24 amphibians. Domesticated animals are a completely different category. There's 23 dogs and cats, 17 horses. Guess how many states have an official mushroom? Just 3. Here's some more state symbols that outnumber state mushrooms. Musical instruments, dances, shells, colors, sports, desserts, beverages, firearms, astronomy symbols, cooking implements. Seriously, 3 states alone have Dutch oven as their official cooking implement. 31 states have official soils. That's dirt, people. Dirt! 31 states have official dirt, but only 3 states have an official mushroom. Let that sink in. Needless to say, calling mushrooms underrepresented as state symbols is an understatement. But let's take a closer look at the 3 official ones, shall we? The first state to designate an official mushroom was Minnesota. That's right, you. You were number 1. Congratulations. In fact, the process started way back in 1983 at an MMS board meeting. You actually have a really nice write-up about the process on your own website, which I'm sure most of you have seen already, so I won't go into too much detail on it. But here's the tantalizing line in the first paragraph. Herb Harper in Malfred Ferndock's Morel Cookbook tells the story. So, the first time I gave this lecture for NAMA, I didn't have access to this 1980s era out-of-print book. Well, one turned up at the silent auction fundraiser this last September at NAMA's Continental Foray in Missouri, and I'm not gonna lie, I may have spent far too much money bidding on it, solely because you, MMS, referenced it on your website. But it's a charming little book, and it contains this great story about how the first state mushroom came to be. According to Herb, it was suggested at an MMS board meeting that a state mushroom would help publicize Minnesota Mycological Society. So, in February of 1983, he called State Senator Gary Leidig, who drafted a bill. And while it didn't come to a vote in 1983, local newspapers wrote articles about it and received a lot of negative letters to the editor. Some called it a waste of taxpayer dollars. There was a lot of concern that it would attract out-of-staters who would come and pick all the mushrooms. Locals worried their secret morel spots would be invaded, and that it was much better to keep morels a secret. One member of MMS even wrote an opposition stating that there was no official backing from MMS because the membership had not voted on it. However, most society members welcomed the publicity and did not see a threat to their secret spots. The following spring got the ball rolling again. Herb, along with a few other members of MMS and Senator Leidig, testified before the Senate Agricultural and Natural Resources Committee. Herb talked about the ecological significance of fungi and the commercial point of how tourism could bring dollars to the state. The bill was passed and signed into law by Governor Rudy Perpich. But hey, you may have been number 1, but you are not off the hook, Minnesota. Do you see a problem here? Morchella esculenta is no longer the name. It changed. DNA analysis in 2012 showed that the yellow morels in North America were different enough from European yellow morels that they should be their own species. The name was changed to Morchella esculentoides, and as of 2014, the preferred nomenclature for the yellow morels in your area is Morchella americana. Esculenta is now exclusively a European species. Frankly, if I were Minnesota, I'd be a little embarrassed. But you could fix this. How to fix it exactly varies from state to state, but this has actually already been done before in Washington when their proposed state mushroom scientific name changed. I'll talk a little bit more about that later on in this lecture. Minnesota actually already revised this once in 2004, so it can be done again. I'm putting you to task, MMS. I encourage every club in every state to work on an official mushroom, and I'm not letting you off the hook just because you got the assignment done early. But maybe get some of your younger members who weren't around in the 80s to hop on board for this one, and good luck. Moving on. In 1999, Oregon was the second state to designate a mushroom as an official symbol. Dr. Kevin Winthrop of the Oregon Mycological Society in Portland decided the state needed an official mushroom. So he went to his friend, Representative Chris Beck, to write a bill, HJR 68. They, along with other myco enthusiasts, met with legislators with cool facts, photos, receipts, etc., and they got 2 senators to agree to bipartisan support. But once again, there was controversy. The 1999 session was projected to be the longest ever. Some considered this a waste of legislators' time. This article says legislators passed more time arguing about how much time they were wasting than discussing the fungus itself. The bill ended up passing by a single vote. And that's how the Pacific golden chanterelle, Cantharellus formosus, became the Oregon state mushroom.
I learned Texas has a state mushroom. It's just the 3rd state to designate an official mushroom after Governor Abbott signed a resolution Friday. It's called a Texas star mushroom because of its shape. Apparently it's so rare, only a few hundred people have ever seen it. It can only be found in parts of central and northern Texas, Oklahoma, and Japan. The only other country it's ever been found is Japan. I think that's what I said there. Japan. Interesting. Yeah, I'm over here like, okay, state flower wasn't enough. We needed a mushroom. Okay, interesting. Y'all enjoy that.
That's right. Just this last summer, Corioactis gister was officially named as the Texas state mushroom. The fall 2021 issue of Fungi magazine had a really nice article about it, which also lists some general do's and don'ts for getting a state mushroom made official. It's a great magazine that you should subscribe to if you don't already. Now, even though this announcement about Texas getting a state mushroom seemed to come out of left field for a lot of people, this actually wasn't the first time there was an attempt to have this mushroom named as an official symbol of Texas. There was a failed attempt in 1997. So here side by side are the 2 bills, the failed 97 bill on the left and the successful 2021 bill on the right. There are some key differences in the verbiage that I'm certain made a huge difference. I got to chat with the person who almost single-handedly led this effort. For privacy reasons, she's asked me to refer to her only by her initials, CY. Here's a direct quote from her. In 1997, they tried to pass it and failed, but they made mistakes in my opinion. They called it a fungus, which doesn't sound as appealing, and they also called it a devil's cigar. And I said no, it's a mushroom, not a fungus, and let's play to it being the Texas star because it's the symbol of the state. She basically went on to say the average Texan is going to be put off by a name like Devil's Cigar, and they're not going to remember Corioactis gister. But Texas Star, that's a name they can wrap their head around. And she actually told me a funny story when she was presenting the idea to House Rep Ben Lamont. He opposes gun control legislation, so when she met with him, she described it like a gun. When this mushroom opens, it does it with a pop. It blows smoke in your face, you know. So he got on board. Another thing about the 97 bill was that it was only introduced in the Senate, and it never even made it out of the Senate. The 2021 bill was introduced as a companion bill in both the House and the Senate by House Rep Ben Lamont and Senator Donna Campbell as sponsors. Ben introduced his bill to the House subcommittee, they voted, it went to the floor voted, then it crossed over to the Senate. This turned out to be good because the Senate bill that Donna presented died in committee. But then Ben's came over from the House to the Senate floor and there it passed. And once it passed by the Senate, then it went to the governor's desk. And here's a video of that.
Senator Campbell, you're recognized for a motion to suspend the regular order of business on HCR 61.
Thank you, Mr. President. You know, you're such a fun guy. I could not wait to bring up this bill because it doesn't take up much room. This bill.
How much room does it take up on your calendar?
Well, not much room. Okay. This bill serves to designate the Texas star mushroom as the official mushroom of the state of Texas. It resembles the star that adorns our Texas flag and is native only to Texas and Japan. And with that, head fungi of everybody, I move to suspend the regular order of business. Too much shrooms here.
Senator West, for what purpose?
Question of the author.
You yield?
Yes, sir.
Senator Campbell, mushrooms come from trees, is that correct?
Well, they grow in dark, warm, moist areas. And if that's on the bark of a tree or in the forest somewhere, yes.
So they come from trees, is that right? I mean, where do they come?
No.
Tell me about mushrooms.
Some are edible. Some, when you eat them, they're complimentary to your meal. Some, when you eat them, you just take a trip and it doesn't cost you anything.
She passed a bill about that a little earlier.
Yes, I did. Psilocybin.
Do cows have anything to do with mushrooms?
No, but you know, cows must like them inherently because they provide a great fertilizer for these shrooms.
Fertilizer? What type of fertilizer do they provide?
The kind that stinks and is warm if you step in it.
So, that kind that stinks and you step in it, what type is that? Is there a name for it?
Manure.
Who?
Poop.
Poop?
Which is what we do see sometimes here.
Okay, I have a better understanding now. Thank you.
Thank you, sir, and I would appreciate your vote for this mushroom bill. Resolution.
Senator Campbell moves suspension of the regular order on HCR 61. Any objection? Hearing none, rules are suspended. Gotta wash my fingers. The chair lays out the following resolution. The secretary will read the resolution.
HCR 61, designating the Texas star mushroom as the official state mushroom of Texas.
Senator Campbell, you're recognized for a motion.
I move adoption.
Senator Campbell moves adoption of the resolution on mushrooms. The secretary will call the roll.
Alvarado, Betancourt, Birdwell, Blanco, Buckingham, Campbell.
There are 31 mushroom lovers and no mushroom haters. The adoption... Very good. Do you like mushrooms, Tierson? Do you like mushrooms? No, he doesn't like mushrooms. So he's, I read it's 31-0.
Yeah. He hasn't got a developed palate yet.
Okay.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you all mushroom lovers.
This is your mushroom session, Senator Campbell, you realize.
And it really hasn't taken up much room, has it? Thank you.
So, see why I offered up this checklist for anyone elsewhere who wants to take this on. Create a digital binder as a placeholder for a lot of good information. She used Facebook because it's free and easy to use. Learn when the state and House of Representatives meet in session in your state. Get a sponsor in the House and the Senate, 2 people. Try to get past the guard dogs, administrative director, chief of staff, whatever. Create a compelling story and be a persuasive communicator. And partner with a team of experts who know the mushroom and can speak to the mushroom. Hey, remember when I said there were only 3 state mushrooms? That's actually only sorta true. Yes, there are only 3 official state mushrooms, but actually there's a few other state symbols that are in the fungal kingdom. So let's go on a little side tangent and talk about official state microbes. Yes, they are a thing. So a microbe is a microorganism that exists as a single cell or as a colony of cells. There are 6 official and proposed state microbes. Most of these are bacteria, but 2 are fungi. Oregon was the very first state to get an official microbe, brewer's yeast, which is part of the fungal kingdom. In February 2013, the bill was introduced to the House where, unlike chanterelles that barely passed by a single vote, this passed by unanimous vote. Then it crossed over to the Senate where it passed by a vote of 28-2. The other state with an official fungal microbe is Illinois, with Penicillium rubens. That's the strain of mold where the world's first antibiotic, penicillin, comes from. This is also the most recent. It passed right around the same time Texas got its mushroom. The idea was first conceived by Gary Kusniar after listening to an NPR broadcast of All Things Considered about state microbe designations. He teamed up with Dr. Neil Price to form the Illinois State Microbe Designation Project. Penicillium rubens was decided on as a good candidate. World War II necessitated moving the work on penicillin to the United States, where industrial supplies were not as constrained for the war effort. It was in Peoria, Illinois, where the strain having the highest production was found on a moldy cantaloupe. This led to a major breakthrough in isolating higher-yielding strains and methods for industrialized production of penicillin, all of which was developed in Illinois between 1941 and 1943.
Well, in other news, it is official. Illinois now has a state microbe. Governor J.B. Pritzker signing on the dotted line and making Penicillium rubens the official state microbe of Illinois. How exciting! A moldy cantaloupe from a Peoria farmers market holding the key to mass produce penicillin in World War II. State Senator Dave Keller sponsored that legislation.
But wait, there's more. One solitary state has an official lichen. This is Ramalina menzitzii, aka the lace lichen, the official state lichen of California. Lichens are a composite organism made up of fungi living together with algae or cyanobacteria in a mutualistic relationship. The California Lichen Society decided that designating an official lichen was an important step in increasing public awareness of the roles lichens play in our natural environment. They found a congressman who took up their cause and slipped it into a larger bill that was already moving through on water and environmental safety, which actually makes a lot of sense since lichens are known for their sensitivity to pollution and climate, and are actually being used in California to monitor air quality and climate change. Some of the qualities that were listed are that it's easy to recognize, common throughout much of California, and strikingly beautiful. Here's a photo of me geeking out over some lace lichen last winter when I was snowbirding down in California. So there you have it, all the official state mushrooms and official mushroom adjacent type symbols. Now let's look at a couple of the failures. I am very sad to report that my state of residence is one of them. In 2017, a bill proposing matsutake, or the American pine mushroom, as the official mushroom of Washington state was introduced to the legislature. The idea for the bill came from students at the Evergreen State College at Olympia. Representative Lori Dolan sponsored the bill. Now, those of you who have ever read one of these amazing books know matsutake is actually a really interesting choice as a Washington state mushroom. There's a whole underground subculture of commercial pickers revolved around this thing, and it's sometimes been referred to as the most expensive mushroom in the world. And that's why some folks consider this choice problematic. Matsutake is mycorrhizal. It can't be cultivated, only harvested from the wild. The vast majority of matsutake picked in Washington state are flown clear across the world and sold in Japan, where they fetch exorbitant prices. Wild matsutake in Japan has been in sharp decline due to habitat loss and other factors, which is why there is such a high demand for Pacific Northwest matsutake. Commercial pickers are mostly immigrants, often undocumented, living off-grid, often picking illegally, and selling for cash to roadside bystands that don't ask questions. Do we really want to be celebrating the capitalistic over-harvesting of a rare mushroom that's exported and sold almost exclusively to rich people on the other side of the world? On the flip side, some considered it a sensible choice. Even though it's called the pine mushroom, here in the Pacific Northwest it primarily associates with western hemlock, which is the Washington state tree. Now, you'll recall the Pacific golden chanterelle is the Oregon state mushroom, which usually associates with Douglas fir, which is also the Oregon state tree. So it just makes perfect sense. It's like poetry. These two states are adjacent to one another and make up the bulk of the Pacific Northwest, and all of these mushrooms and trees can be found throughout both states. Anyway, the bill passed the committee, but it never even got a vote in the full House. A similar bill was introduced the next year with a companion bill in the Senate. In the meantime, the species name changed from Tricholoma magnivelari to Tricholoma muralienum when they split American matsutake into two species, one for the east and one for the west. The House bill at least contained an amendment which showed the name change. But it just never got anywhere. Missouri introduced a bill in 2011 that proposed the smooth chanterelle, Cantharellus lateridius, as their state mushroom. I actually had a hard time finding info about this one. All the links on the government website are dead, but I did find this article, which it's actually kind of a goofy article with a few head-scratcher lines in it. It pits chants against morels like those are the only two conceivable options for a state mushroom. But it does explain that the bill was sponsored by Representative Kathleen Fairs at the urging of the Missouri Mycological Society, and also quotes Maxine Stone, who spoke to the committee. And for the record, Maxine is the past president of MOMS and was one of the main organizers of NAMA's Continental Foray that happened in Missouri earlier this year. It was shot down by Representative Kestner, and this is a quote, "To make this the state mushroom when everyone in this room has heard of the morel would be a travesty. I just can't believe that we do something like that to our public citizens of the state of Missouri." Ugh. Our neighbors to the north in Alberta, Canada, have also attempted to name a provincial mushroom. After a lengthy process, Lycinum boreale was picked by PAMA, Pick a Wild Mushroom, Alberta. According to this newsletter article from the Edmonton Mycological Society, it was chosen in part because it's a good edible bolete that doesn't have any dangerous lookalikes. While there was some support, there also wasn't. Once again, it was noted that the legislature was wasting time on mushrooms when they could be discussing job losses or foster care. Others simply disagreed on the choice, preferring a puffball or shaggy mane. Sharon Cott, an Edmonton MLA, tabled the bill. Quote, "The red cap is a beautiful and tasty mushroom, but it can be very easily confused with what's known as the flycatcher mushroom, and that one can be deadly. They are very tricky to identify." Like, I don't even know how to respond to that. Just look at them. They look nothing alike. Ugh. But let's move on to happier subjects. Current efforts that are looking good. There are two states that are currently practically just on the verge of getting an official mushroom, and I absolutely love the proposed mushroom in both of these states. First is Massachusetts and the giant puffball. It started in late 2018 when a high school student and a member of the Boston Mycological Club asked Senator Cindy Friedman to petition the giant puffball as the Massachusetts state mushroom.
Furthermore, it's really iconic, which is important for it to become our state icon. So, our state mushroom icon, and it's really big. It's really pretty. I suggest you all look into it. It's a beautiful mushroom. It's edible, and yeah, again, it's very important ecologically. Fungi in general are underappreciated organisms. They're extremely important to the environment, and they're also a good source of food. And I think this would be a step in the right direction to recognize this kingdom. So Minnesota and Oregon already do have state mushrooms. And the giant puffball mushroom, like by declaring it our state mushroom, you could recognize this humble yet fascinating part of our natural heritage. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. So just in conclusion, one of the many things I learned from Liam is that Boston is the home to the oldest amateur mycological club in the United States, the Boston Mycological Club. It was founded in 1895, making it all the more fitting that Massachusetts recognized one of its native fungi in this way. And I think the giant puffball mushroom seems the perfect candidate. I would also like to acknowledge Liam for the work he's done to bring this bill before us. It is heartening and humbling to when you meet students in our Commonwealth who are committed and care so much about a subject and are willing to go through all of the steps that we need to do to become a bill. So I really want to acknowledge Liam and tell you all how proud I am of Liam and the town of Arlington. So thank you very much for your consideration.
So that bill was from mid-2019, and well, we all know what happened not long after that. Everything kind of just stalled for a time. But just very recently, Senator Friedman reintroduced the bill, and it's been seen very favorably. So I'm confident Massachusetts just might be the next state to get an official fungus. And by the way, for anyone watching this who happens to be in Massachusetts, be sure to write to your congressperson to ask for their support of this bill. Not that this is a race or anything, but there's actually one other state that's super close. They might even beat out Massachusetts. I'm talking about New York and Lactarius pecci. This was first proposed by Tom Bigelow and Sigrid Jacob from the New York Mycological Society to raise awareness to the public about mushrooms and how crucial fungal diversity is to the Earth's ecosystem. This mushroom also honors two great New York State mycologists, Gertrude Simmons Burlingham, who first described it in 1908, and Charles Horton Peck, for whom she named it. I got to chat with Michael Moser, a key player in all this, and she offered up a little more insight. They very specifically did not want to choose a choice edible mushroom to discourage foraging from becoming super popular or people accidentally poisoning themselves. They also didn't want to choose a poisonous mushroom. Instead, they wanted to move the conversation away from eating fungi and focus more on ecology and conservation. They also wanted a mushroom that spoke to New York in a specific way. Burlingham was from New York and was one of the first women to get an advanced degree, but she couldn't get a job in mycology because no one would hire a woman. She ended up teaching high school in Brooklyn, but continued her mycological research in her spare time. She described this mushroom and named it in honor of Peck, who was another super important New York State mycologist, possibly one of the greatest mycologists in the world, and an incredibly important figure in the establishment of mycology in the U.S. I first gave this lecture for NAMA back in May of 2022. Since then, the New York legislative session has timed out, but this is still a really active effort. I recently got to chat again with Michael Moser, as well as Vivian Tarter, who's currently leading the way on these efforts, Sigrid Jacob, president of New York Mycological Society, and Eugenia Bone, who has been an enormous help on the legislative front. They were able to give me some thrilling updates. In October, NYMS sponsored a widely successful Fungi Fest and obtained hundreds of signatures on a petition that is now included in all mailings to state legislators. They also recruited an artist to illustrate a wonderful zine to hand out. The plan is to reintroduce the bill in the upcoming session for both the Assembly and the Senate, and get as many co-sponsors as possible. Eugenia has gotten buy-in from at least one person in the Assembly, who in the last session was head of the Agriculture Committee. Michael also said something that really stood out to me. I have a very different perspective now than the last time we spoke. For all this work a state mushroom takes, there have to be other things we can ask for beyond the lovely token of a state mushroom in itself. Why is a state mushroom important? What does it represent? Why are we bothering busy lawmakers when they have more pressing concerns? What are the larger goals that we're trying to accomplish? It became clear to me from some of your clips that elected officials who actually bothered to pass their state mushroom bills did not even have a one-page fact sheet about fungi. They didn't know what fungi are, and more importantly, they didn't know why they are important in really enormous environmental terms, such as helping to regulate forest fire, sequestering carbon, controlling water runoff, and helping to maintain the health of endangered trees, plants, and animals. They didn't know anything about their environmental status. They didn't know anything about who and how and where mycology is studied or why. A one-page fact sheet for elected officials would be a leap forward. Fungi are not the same as most other state emblems, pots and pans, donuts, etc. Fungi are a sustainable agriculture industry that provide clean jobs and taxes. They are an important low-carbon food source. They are key to a number of culturally meaningful foodways. They promote a low-impact use of preserved natural lands. They are important to the pharmaceutical industry and to pesticide-free farming techniques. And then on top of it, they are key drivers of ecological health in meaningful, understudied, and irreplaceable ways. Wow. That's really something to think about. I'm really impressed by the thoughtfulness behind the New York State mushroom effort. The truth is, I ask a lot of folks, both in person and online, what their pick would be for a mushroom representative of where they live, and I've noticed a trend. The vast majority of answers are some variation on morels or chanterelles, with almost no thought behind why, other than those are popular edible mushrooms. It's honestly frustrating. Here's the deal. The fungal kingdom is huge. Estimates suggest there's somewhere between 2.2 and 3.8 million species, with almost 150,000 of those currently described by science. Surely, with all of these options, we can come up with something besides morels and chanterelles. I mean, I get it. They're yummy and they're fun to hunt, but they're everywhere. Do we really want a repeat of state birds? I mean, look at this nonsense. Look at all those repeats. The Midwest has 7 cardinals all bunched together. Stupid. As far as I'm concerned, Minnesota beat everyone to the morels. They won. Done. Oregon got chanterelles. Done. Everyone else lost their chance. Too bad, so sad. They gotta come up with something new now. This is why I love Coreoactis gister and Lactarius pecii. They're unique. They have great stories behind them. They're compelling. They make you think. And no other state will ever pick them. And why would they? These mushrooms speak specifically to Texas and New York. I first created this lecture for NAMA back in the spring. Since then, I've done 2 interactive workshops about state mushroom efforts, both in Wisconsin, the Northwoods Foray and Mycelium Mysteries. In these workshops, I encouraged participants to think beyond these surface-level choices and imagine the ideal mushroom for their state. And since both of these workshops were in Wisconsin, well, let's take a look at Wisconsin. It's actually kind of surprising that the Badger State doesn't already have a state mushroom because they have official state symbols for pretty much everything else. They're even one of the dirt states. But thinking about the Texas star, participants first discussed mushrooms endemic to Wisconsin, species that have not been found anywhere else. There's actually a couple. The first is an undescribed Phaeocolybia. It's actually only been found a couple of times on Madeline Island in Lake Superior and nowhere else. At first glance, it looks like a regular old mushroom, but if you pull it out carefully, it has this ridiculously long and impressive taproot-like structure. It's definitely unique and cool, but at the moment, not a whole lot is known about it, and it doesn't even really have a name, so it's unlikely to be a great candidate. Wisconsin also has Amanita schwammagenensis, and I just love this wacky Latin. What even is this? I'll tell you, it's named for the Schwammagen-Nicolay National Forest, which is even more ridiculous. Like, half these letters don't even make sense. Wisconsin, you're so goofy. But anyway, it was named by Britt Bunyard after Wisconsin's Schwammagen-Nicolay National Forest, where it was first discovered. They find it every year when they foray there, and again, it has never been observed anywhere else. So, here we've got 2 species totally unique to Wisconsin, and yet it was generally agreed by everyone that they were both a little bit too rare and esoteric for a state symbol. Melissa Klatka, who's vice president of Wisconsin Mycological Society, approached the question from a completely different perspective. She didn't care about endemic mushrooms. She felt the best way to represent her home state was through good home cooking. For her, the answer was easy. Maitake, hen of the woods, Graphola frondosa. As she put it, Wisconsin is such a friendly state, and it's perfect to share. It's a big enough mushroom you can split it with your neighbors and have plenty to spare. Tavis Lynch, venerable mushroom cultivator and quite possibly the most knowledgeable person when it comes to the fungal species of Wisconsin, also had an interesting opinion. Marasimus rotula, aka the pinwheel mushroom, because they are common, dainty, and beautiful, just like Wisconsin's state flower, the wood violet. Every floor in Wisconsin's forests are littered with them, and it would be a fun and educational activity for kids to go out and find the state mushroom. And while they're not commonly eaten, I did find some century-old recipes noting that they can be added to gravies, and when used to garnish venison, adds an appropriate touch of the wild woodlands. I like it. One participant from Mycelium Mysteries who didn't want to be named favored shaggy mane, Coprinus comatus, because it's tenacious, just like Wisconsin's state animal, the American badger. Dr. Tess Kenny, past president of Wisconsin Mycological Society, really had a fascinating and unusual suggestion. Chlorosoboria arugonescens, the elf cup fungus. These tiny cup-shaped saprobic fungi grow on dead hardwoods and are super easy to miss when they're fruiting, but evidence of their presence can be found on every trail in Wisconsin nearly any time of year. This mushroom contains a pigment which stains the wood that it's growing on a striking blue-green color. This spalting is color-fast and permanent, which is why it's so highly prized in decorative woodworking and inlay dating back centuries. Here's a quote from Tess. "The color reminds me of the Great Lakes. I just really like the symbolism in that. There's also something so magical about the name elf cups. Then I found out the fungus spalted the wood and gave it new color, which is why it's sought after by carpenters and craftspeople. So not only is it beautiful when it fruits, but it leaves traces that last for centuries in works of art and furniture and becomes integral to the home. I think about the seafarers and craftspeople that came from one world to another and discovered a similar fungus here, and how happy they must have been. You find the wood a lot, but you don't find the fruiting mushroom very often, which makes it special. When you do find it, it's beautiful. Just beautiful." Tess was so passionate about Chlorosoboria, she managed to persuade several other members to agree with her. So, who knows? Maybe we'll be seeing elf cups soon in the Wisconsin legislature. When I ask folks what they think the obvious choices are for state mushrooms, the number one answer I hear is lobster mushrooms for Maine. I guess because it's a state famous for a different kind of lobster, so it seems like a natural pairing? But is it? Sometimes what we think is the obvious answer isn't. Back in the summer of 2021, I was in Colorado for NAMA's Continental Foray, and tangent, their favorite for a Colorado state mushy seems to be Boletus rubiceps, aka the Rocky Mountain Red. I spent some time chatting with NAMA's now past president Barbara Ching about her home state of Iowa. She matter-of-factly stated that the natural choice for Iowa's mushroom symbol should be corn smut. Ustalago mates is a fungus that causes galls to form on corn. In Spanish, it's known as huitlacoche. Iowans know it as corn smut. And by the way, it's delicious. This is a direct quote from Barbara. "I love to eat it. Before the ear is too infected, it's adorable to look at. And everywhere you look in Iowa, there is corn. I grew up in Iowa. I don't think I've ever lived anywhere without a cornfield in my vision. Iowa needs to have a mushroom that grows in a cornfield." Now, I don't know a whole lot about Iowa, but I do know that it's full of corn. Like, the state's entire identity is corn. Even when corn has nothing to do with the subject, if it's in Iowa, corn is going to get somehow shoehorned in. It's a very corny state. So yeah, I agreed with her. This seemed like a natural choice to me. But when NAMA's first vice president, Dave Layton, who is also from Iowa, heard about this, he disagreed. And I have to say, he made a very convincing argument. He pointed out that most Iowans see corn smut as a blight on their crops. They hate it. Here's a direct quote. Our state is really ruled by the chemical agricultural complex, and our legislature is also ruled by special interests. And if we were going to have a state mushroom, it wouldn't do well for it to be one that winds up on the Monsanto death list. Iowa is Roundup ready. Corn alcohol, corn ethanol, etc. None of those things work with corn smut. But with that said, it would almost be a better thorn in their side for it to be corn smut. Maybe it would get people to think about how we're destroying our ecosystem. But Dave did also offer up an alternate choice, and I gotta say I really like it. His choice? The knothole mushroom, Hypsizygus ulmarius. And I gotta say I also really love that he calls it a knothole mushroom. The more common name for this one is elm oyster, which I've always thought was a stupid name, seeing as it's neither an oyster nor does it typically grow on elm. But knothole mushroom actually makes perfect sense, because that's exactly where you always find it, growing out of knotholes. Here's another quote. The knothole mushroom is like Iowans. It's not flashy, it's not a bright color, it's good to eat, but it's not so amazing in flavor that it causes it to be overrated. It's just the most ordinary mushroom you can find, and maybe that in itself is a virtue. Like the people of Iowa, ordinary and common. Why not? Corn smut is far more than Monsanto thinks it is, but I just can't see getting an Iowa legislator on board with it. And that's why I like the knothole mushroom. And hey, even I can draw one. And you don't even have to color them in. So I want to discuss one other trend I've noticed with all these state mushroom efforts. The majority of the time when a bill fails to pass, it's because there's too much disagreement about the actual mushroom in question. In Alberta, those who tabled the Lycinum boreale did so because they favored a different mushroom. One person wanted puffballs, another wanted shaggy mane. So they voted against the entire thing and ended up with no mushroom at all. Same thing with the smooth chanterelle in Missouri. Representative Kessner literally shut down the entire bill because it wasn't a morel. It's like these people want to see the world burn. On Boston Mycological Club's Facebook, the post announcing the puffball bill was just riddled with all these negative Nancy comments, when they should be coming together and celebrating the fact that they're one of the few states making any sort of effort at all. And if you think that's bad, then you don't even want to see how nasty it got in a California mushroom Facebook group back in the early days of their state's efforts. Speaking of California, I've got an update there too. Those of you who saw my original webinar will recall that California was in the middle of a big campaign where every citizen of the state could vote from a list of 6 species finalists, narrowed down by mushroom clubs throughout the state. Now, I lived in California for over 20 years, so you bet I was invested in this. I told everyone I knew to vote candy caps, clearly the best choice. Well, the results came in not long after my webinar aired, and you're not going to believe this, but the freaking chanterelle won. Of course. Literally my last choice from this list. But you know what? I still support this, 150%. When that bill comes up, I will be telling every single friend and relative I know in California to voice their support for the chanterelle. Why? Because if we're going to get a mushroom symbol named in all 50 states, we need to put aside our differences and come together in a show of solidarity. I want to close this lecture on a little note about what's happening locally to me. My home club, the South Sound Mushroom Club, recently had a family-friendly foray retreat in which I put out this fun little activity encouraging kids and adults to illustrate their pick for Washington State mushroom. There were a lot of drawings of golden chanterelle, and there were also a few confused people who thought matsutake was already officially our mushroom, even though that bill's been dead in the water since 2018. A young Evergreen graduate named Luca Hickey proposed something completely different, which actually ended up getting a lot of endorsement from folks at this event. Stropharia ambigua, the questionable Stropharia. And it didn't go unnoticed by me that he's also the top observer of this mushroom on iNaturalist, so clearly a fan. But you know what? I'm a fan too. First, it's basically endemic to the Pacific Northwest. You won't find it anywhere else in the world, but here it's one of the most common mushrooms. You can find it almost any time of the year, even in the dead of winter. It actually loves cold weather. You often find it growing right out of the snow. In fact, it's growing in my front yard right now. That's actually where most of these photos came from. I live on 10 acres in the woods like some kind of hedge witch. It's also beautiful. They have these striking cottony veils, and they tend to grow in these impressive photogenic troops. Even if you've never been to the Pacific Northwest, you probably actually have already seen them from this viral photo that makes the rounds on social media every now and then. And best of all, it doesn't have any of the controversial baggage that the matsutake had. It's technically edible, but no one eats it. No one will be fighting over it in the woods or over harvesting. There's no commercial value to it. But it's not poisonous either, nor does it really have any poisonous lookalikes. It's saprotrophic, meaning it processes and recycles dead organic leaf litter. So, like New York's pick, this one moves the conversation away from eating mushrooms and allows room to talk about ecology and conservation. Honestly, I like this. I'm gonna push for this. Well, that's all I have to say, so thanks for coming to my talk.
Was there anyone who had any questions?
I'm seeing a couple things. First off, thanks, Rose. That's super fun.
Thank you.
Let's see. One person asked if you have an iNaturalist username.
I am Tursi Art everywhere on the internet. So if there's something that I have an account, I always make it Tursi Art, which is just my last name and the word art, A-R-T. So easy to find.
Yeah. Did anyone have any questions for Rose? I also Alan DeSouza of the San Francisco Club is here, who did a lot of the work to propose the California state mushroom and work.
Yeah, I should say when I did my original lecture, I talked with Alan a really long time and got a lot of good info from him, and he really is the guy who is doing it, spearheaded the entire effort in California. So yeah, Alan is another great person to ask questions. So do you have anything you want to add, Alan? Did you have any updates?
I will add that the legislation that we wrote, we sort of got through the cycle very slowly during COVID. And by the time we actually got chanterelle, which I like you, Rose, not my favorite, but really kind of like a mundane choice. I was going for the jack-o'-lantern, the glow-in-the-dark mushroom.
That was my second favorite. So,
but it was the second, the first runner-up in the end. I was surprised that Candy Cap actually had such a poor showing in the end. But I will say that the legislation, David Aurora, who described Cantarellus californicus, helped write the legislation for us too, so he's in the mix in this. And so hopefully in this next leg cycle, which will be starting very soon, we'll get it through.
So it's a different chanterelle than the Oregon chanterelle.
Yeah. But it is,
which is funny because when I was doing that stuff locally to me in Washington, we were at a big spring morel retreat, and the most popular answer to the question for Washington was Pacific golden chanterelle, and I was like, that's already the state mushroom of Oregon. You can't pick that one. Sorry.
Awesome. Yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess you could. Like, there's 7 cardinals in the Midwest, all bunched together.
Yeah.
Which, so it's a thing that happens, but I feel like we could do better. But I mean, like I said in the video, I support chanterelles for California, and I understand it's a technically a subspecies, even though it's virtually identical to the Pacific golden chanterelle, and it was the same mushroom 10 years ago. But I mean, I get it, but I fully support it because, that's why there's only 3 official mushrooms, because every time there's an effort, someone has to step in, and because it's not their pick, they want to shoot the whole thing down. And I just find that very discouraging. I did actually have one other update that didn't make it into that video. So I recorded the video about a week, maybe a week and a half ago, because I'm actually in California right now on a road trip and visiting family, and I knew I wouldn't have time to record it after I left. But I reached out to a whole bunch of people for updates, and State Senator Cindy Friedman from Massachusetts actually wrote back to me like the day after I recorded this video. And I was basically just asking her if there were any updates or if it was still happening. And she said, let me just read what she wrote to me. Hi, Rose. Thanks for reaching out. The giant puffball mushroom bill made it pretty far in the legislative process this past session, but ultimately did not get to the governor's desk. I plan to refile and continue to push for this legislation in this new legislative session, which started yesterday and runs through the end of 2024. Hope you have a happy new year. And then I wrote, I just wrote thanks. And then she's very excited. She wrote she was very excited about it. So that was really great. The last person I actually expected to write back to me wrote back. So that was cool.
Awesome. There's one note in the chat, and it's about the Minnesota state soil. The Lester Loam says it was a rider on an ag bill. And I love where you kind of make fun of in your presentation the different things and the dirt. Our club actually meets in Borlaug Hall, which is the soil science building for the U of M. So we might have to battle.
I poke fun of it, but I actually think
soil.
I think official soils are actually wonderful. It's funny. It's funny to make fun of dirt.
But it's totally funny. Yeah.
But I actually love it. So
also I see and Adele wrote a nice note thanking you for the presentation and saying the thoughtfulness about some of the ecological issues. And Adele, thank you for writing the article about the Minnesota state mushroom and how it came to be. The thing that I noticed about that is that Herb Harper was in the club, and he was Forest Lake High School biology teacher. I remember my dad had him for a teacher. So there's all sorts of connections between all the people we know and the things we do. Sometimes you're doing things and you don't know how many people it will touch. And that's why I love having guests here to connect. And I thank everyone for being on the Zoom meetings, because you just never know who you'll meet or get to ask a question of or make a comment to. So yeah, again, thank you all for joining. Are there any other questions for Rose tonight?
I'm gonna scroll up, see if I missed anything.
We actually, I'm also in California right now for the Sonoma County Mushroom Camp. So we're heading north, and we pulled over to find a place to do a Zoom meeting. We happen to be not very glamorous, but we're in McDonald's. And right down the street, there's a guy selling mushrooms, buying mushrooms from pickers. And then another guy came in here and heard the conversation. He's like, I heard the word mushrooms. I was going to sit down and listen to the presentation with you guys. So I think
that's awesome. I'm glad that the random McDonald's goers are interested in mushrooms.
What's the buyer buying, Kathy?
Black trumpets, hedgehogs, and yellow chanterelles, probably Formosas. They're not buying winter chanterelles because it's melting in these rains that we're having out here.
The mud puppies.
Yeah.
The other name for the California chanterelles, the mud puppy. They're very different than the chanterelles we find. But yeah, I think this also speaks a lot to the mission of the Minnesota Mycological Society, just to teach people about mushrooms and mycology in general. So anytime you're sort of sharing a conversation with someone, a lot like the people we're talking about in proposing the bills, that it's like they get shot down because people are like, oh, I get to pick a favorite mushroom. I don't know anything about them. Actually, I think, Rose, there were a lot of comments when you played the legislation of, was it the Texas one?
The one where they had all the really awful mushroom puns and
oh my goodness,
politicians trying to be funny and obviously not understanding even the most basic facts about mushrooms.
Grow on trees. It's like to me that was just the epitome of how little people know. So our work isn't done.
Right. And when Michael wrote that update to me, which I don't know if that was too corny with the music, but I had fun with it when I was editing it. But that was her takeaway. That's why she wrote that. She saw all those clips and was like, it's these people don't even have a one-page fact sheet about mushrooms. You know, maybe if they knew more about these bills they're pushing, they'd be more into it. Which I thought was really she's incredibly insightful. I really enjoyed talking with her. So I really love the zine they put together. I didn't have the pictures. I only had the draft, but I thought that was really a clever idea. And I'm an artist, so now I want to do a zine. And I really like
I love the idea of zines.
I really like Questionable Strafaria for Washington State. I became a fan when Lucas said that. At first I was like, wait, what? But then it just grew on me the more I thought of it. It was a great.
So it seems like our state mushroom was just simply the morel or morchella. And then it seems like we updated it to be esculenta, and it got passed through just as it was being studied and changed back, is what it, by the dates you talked about.
Yeah, the bill was amended once,
Yeah.
which is why you can do it again. You did it already, you know. Probably would have been good to wait
But now we have to choose which morel it is.
That's fair. That's gonna, well, you gotta.
We got a lot of
that's on you guys. You get to do it. And like I said, you know, you won the morale, you know.
I think we need to stake out Americana. Just leave it at that.
Probably Americana.
Yeah, it's very, you know, I like it. It's very patriotic name. So but yeah, I mean, the way you talk to people, if every mushroom hunter had their way, 47 out of 50 states would have morel as their state mushroom. So I really hope it doesn't become that. But I think that things are changing. I really do think that mushroom people do think more on the bigger picture and ecology and, you know, everything else. So I really do think that we'll have more diversity in our state mushrooms once we get there. Like I said, I just absolutely love New York's team just because they're very thoughtful about their choice and why. Not just to change the discussion from eating mushrooms to environmentalism, but also their pick honors some great New York-based mycologists. So there was a lot of thought behind it, and that's why I'm really a big fan. So,
well, Rose, for Wisconsin, you know, there's a mushroom that's common in the Midwest, but not very many other places. It didn't even used to be in books much, as Paragyrodon. So.
Oh yeah, that's true.
Parasporus.
Yeah. I mean, there's really a lot, actually. I mean, I just kind of did a quick. I happen to be there, and I happen to be talking to people and asking them, and then kind of steering the conversation, like, "Hey, besides a chanterelle or a morel, let's what else would you pick that really, you know, speaks to Wisconsin?" And those were just some of the answers I got from a few people I asked, and I thought they were very insightful answers. You know, but it just shows you they're all completely different answers from the same group of people from WMS. So it just shows you could pick almost anything and make it work. I did want to say, you know, I recognize a lot of the names here. I got to meet a lot of you in person because I actually, back in September when you had the in-person meeting, I actually was there because I happened to be driving through Minnesota. And I stopped in and went to the meeting with Britt Bunyard as your speaker. So that was a lot of fun to meet some of you in person. I was actually passing through to go to those two events in Wisconsin that I talked about in this video. So those occurred like literally that weekend and the weekend after. But it's really neat to see some of your faces again.
Awesome. Well, thank you everyone for joining.